all over Europe. Our educational systems are not strong. We're in a state of exile. So when the Jewish people were weakened, their tongue, their language is weakened. And therefore, the influence of the galut on the people, on the language is the force of life. When we're in the land of Israel and we have our Hebrew language, that's the force of life. The forces of life were very poor. We're very poor in the time of the medieval times, the time of the Kuzari, time of Rabbi Yehuda Levi. And therefore, if in Hebrew, maybe today there are about 70 or 80,000 words in Hebrew, the Hebrew language, in spite that in English there might be 500,000 words, it doesn't mean that the other languages are more, are on a higher level. That's something quantitatively. The Hebrew language is a language that God spoke to Adam HaRishon. The Hebrew language is the language that God spoke to the prophets, that He spoke to the kings of Israel. It's the language that God created the world with. And therefore, when we see, for instance, Adam HaRishon, why was he called Adam HaRishon? Because he was created from the Adamah. Why is an Isha called an Isha? She was created from the Ish. So these words and many others show us how divine, how unique the Hebrew language is. So therefore, the Hebrew language is not a technical matter or just an agreement amongst people that came together in the United Nations or scientists. Rather, the Hebrew language is the fruit of of an intrinsic dynamic, of an internal dynamics of God creating life, creating powers of life in the nation of Israel. So therefore, it is a Safa Elokit. It's a divine. The Hebrew language is a divine language that God created the world, that brought the nation of Israel alive again, and so on and so forth. But when you, the king of Kuzari, judge the language by the amount of words, okay, then you're going to see that that's not what is kovea. That doesn't establish the greatness of the language. Another advantage of the Hebrew language, we said, is the power of prophecy. Okay? The leaders, the kings, the prophets, if they would be admonishing, if they would be rebuking the nation of Israel, it would be through the Hebrew language. New words that never existed in any other language, like in the Mishkan, Rabbi Yehuda Levi explains, like the ephod. You never see an ephod in any language in the world. The choshen. We never see a word like choshen or ephod in any of the languages in the world, showing that this is a more inner expression of something that's related to holiness. There are words in the Hebrew language that we don't have otherwise. After the end of this subject, the king wanted to bring a point. Well, poetry in England and Italy and in Europe, in many countries, you see the beauty of poetry, how it's read and how it rhymes. We don't have that in the Hebrew language. It could be. Rabbi Yehuda Levi says we don't have that same thing. But song, praise, written by King David, King Solomon, and Psalms, and the Megillot, and so on and so forth, they don't have to rhyme, because the songs of Israel have content. The songs of Israel have divine objectives, values, morals that we adhere to. And this brings us to what we call, what is really the objective of dibur, of speech. Let's read it right now in Ayin Bet 72. 82. I'm sorry, 72, not 82. I made a mistake. Ki hine kavanat halashon hi lachnis machshava shenit'orra belev hamedaber el toch libo shel hashomea. What do we have language for? What do we have speech for? You're going to express your thought to me. So it's going to leave your mind, and it's going to enter into my heart, my understanding, and you're going to relate an idea, an ideal, a value That's really the purpose of speech, to express your inner world, your intrinsic world, your world of thoughts, of your heart, of your goodwill and desire. V'chavana zo, this intention that you have in your speech, bishleimuta lo tusag. You can't reach the complete value of what speech is for, ki im b'mamad panim b'panim. When you're speaking to me, opposite me, and I'm speaking to you, then both of us can reach the ultimate level of what speech is for. Why? Why isn't it so important, speech? Why can't I send you an SMS message? Why can't I send you an email? Things that are said face to face are advantageous. There's a big advantage when we talk to one another more than writing a message or writing an idea. Like the famous statement, mipi sofrim velo mipi sfarim. The exact term apparently is mipihem velo mipi ktavam. Chazal talk about how we can learn Torah, oral Torah especially, in a chavruta. One chaver to another chaver, one rabbi to a student, one student to another student. Mipihem velo mipi sfarim. It's best to learn, not by you yourself reading a book. Okay? I don't know if you've ever visited you know what a library is? If you've ever visited a library? In the libraries and universities, everyone sits at their cubicle. Everyone sits at their little plots in their place. And you have to be very quiet. If your pin would fall on the floor in the library, shh, they would tell you to please be quiet. That's how people academically study. By themselves from books. That's how they study. If you never witnessed a Beit Midrash in your life, and you came into the Beit Midrash, especially in the top morning hours when the place is filled and people are paired up with twos or threes, and they're learning and they're using their hands and they're raising their voices and they're doing and making their points. Wow, that's how Jewish people study their Torah? Fascinating. I got a call from a group from China a few years ago, right before the Corona, a year before the Corona or so. They're studying in Bar Ilan University, and they heard about the Torah approach of study that's going on for thousands of years, and they wanted to meet up with it. Can they come or not? I didn't really have desire to meet with them, but in the end, I met with them for hours. And they came on a rainy day from Bar Ilan in the winter time, and I brought them to the entrance of the Beit Midrash, a team of men and women, and they're watching, and they're observing, and then we're sitting and analyzing, and they want me to give over the techniques to them so they can use it back in the Chinese schools, because they know, like the Pirkei Avot teaches us in chapter 6, the ingredients for the study of Torah, all the methodology is written in chapter 6 of Pirkei Avot, called Kinyan Torah. That's the name of the parak. And people are amazed. People are amazed. Short story. I heard from one of my rabbis 40 years ago. The U.S. Bar Association, they publish, I don't know, biannually or every few months, a journal. And they came up with a new finding that helps the students prepare for the law examination to become an attorney in the United States. They came up with a new finding. They called it group study. They noticed in their survey that the results of the students studying together in a group is much higher than the student studying by himself. Little do they know that the Jewish people for 3,500 years have been doing group study, and it wasn't a new finding. And it's true. That's how we study. When we study panim el panim, face to face, there's an obvious advantage, much better than just studying from the book. Mipi sofrim, from the mouth of authors or scribes, and not from the books. Let's read the difference. Ki badvarim hane'emarim bepeh. When things are mentioned verbally, bepeh, okay? Adam ne'ezar, b'hafsaka shu mafsik b'diburo. You, the listener, you're aided when the person speaking to you stops in the middle of his speech. B'saimo inyan, or v'hamshachot, or he stops, or he continues. Shu mamshich litzor chibur inyanim. You notice if he does pause or doesn't pause. If he stops, you know this is the end of a matter, an end of an idea. So there's much more terrific understanding when you are listening one to another, speaking to one another. V'chen mi b'midat haroch v'atokef asher b'dibro. You can also, when you're listening to your friend studying together, is he speaking softly, or is he speaking with takifut? Is he speaking sharply? You can judge or evaluate what subject you're dealing with. V'chein, so too, b'tnuat yadav. Does he lift up his hands? Does he address a matter in a certain way? He uses his hands to bring an idea better to you. Uberemazim shanim lahabat pliya. Maybe he uplifts his eyebrows to express wonder. Okay, wow, or his eyes he opens up to a higher. Wow, that's really special. All these things, when you're speaking and learning one to another, it gives much more meaning to the person listening. Oh, she'elah. He sings the question in question form. Is it really true? And he asks the question in question form, or sipur, or he's telling a story. All this, you can't get the same way by just reading the matter, but it's much stronger by speaking to one another. What do you want to say?
No, I just want to ask, like, this matter, like this, how we just explained now, is it then better if you have Huta sit opposite each other, or like you could also sit next to each other? I mean,
it can be the same thing, sitting opposite or sitting alongside. I don't think there's much difference. You can look to him once in a while. There are chavruta that are very serious, that they don't even talk with one another. There could be that they don't even know what his name is. They're just learning, steiging away every day, every morning, every afternoon. So here you can see if it's a question or story, pitui, iyum, or bakasha. Is there a threat in the matter, or is there a request in the matter? She'ena dibura pashut yechola biyam kol ikar. Simple speech by just reading poetry or this or that, you can't really understand this. In other words, speech has a lot of terrific power above and beyond the technical side of reading a book, the technical side of reading a message. Certainly we don't please misunderstand. Rav Aviner explains in his Sefer that we don't have opposition in reading Sfarim. We don't have opposition in reading Sfarim. But do you remember that the oral Torah initially could not be written down? And if the oral Torah could not be written down, then how can it be studied? There's no other technique but chavruta, chaver to chaver, father to son, rabbi to student. It has to be done that way because it's not written down. Okay? Eventually, Rabbi had no choice. He had to collect together halachot of his fellow peers, his Tanaim that were writing halachot down. There was no other choice because there was a threat that Torah would be forgotten. But even so, like the Mishnah tells us, the ingredients for learning Torah is through speech with one another. Ufa'amim, and sometimes, 3 lines from the bottom on this page, Pei Zayin, Ye'azera medaber, sometimes the speaker can be helped bitnuot einav. He might move his eyes, v'gabotav, or his eyebrows, v'chol rosho, he might move his head, u'shtei yadav labi'a ka'as or ratzon. He might express anger or desirability by moving his hands in a certain way, bakasha or regesh gava, or he may express a request or the feeling of pride, bashur, according to the amount that he wants to do. All this is only apparent in speech. V'inei, bashiyara mu'at shenishtamer bichtav milishonenu. Whatever is left over that we're going to preserve and we're going to write down from our speech, we're going to write it down. What are we going to write down? Shi yitzir ha'eloka upalo. When we're writing down the oral Torah, it's really the creation of God. It's God's activity. God, what is the first Mishnah in Pirkei Avot? What Torah are we talking about? Are we talking about Torah Shebichtav? Prove to me that it's not Torah Shebichtav.
It's written down in the book. Of course, we have it already.
Moshe Kibel Torah Misinai. Why? Prove to me that the Mishnah cannot be talking about the written Torah. Do we need a Mishnah to tell us that Moshe got the Torah? What I need the novelty to know is that Moshe got the oral Torah as well. That's not written in the written Torah. Okay? It's not written clearly. It could be hinted to, yes. It says Torot at the end of Vayikra. There are other psukim which hint to that 2 Torot were given. But I need the Mishnah to tell me that the oral Torah was given by Moshe at Sinai. And that's the novelty of Mishnah 1 of Pirkei Avot. Okay? And that's the creation of God. Yesh dakuyot v'amukot. There are fine matters, deep matters. Hamishamshot lasbara mile'ah shel kavanat hamedaber. There are fine matters of understanding that can serve explaining what do you mean. V'hem ba'ot bimkom hatnuot hashchichot b'dibur panim bepanim shalem dibarnu. Halohem hate'amim. Cantillation signs in the Chumash. Even if I'm learning by myself, but I'm reading the Torah according to the ta'amim, the cantillation signs. The cantillation signs are an expression of life, on the words. It's an expression of understanding the Misoret. What does this pasuk mean? Where do I stop? Where's there a pause? Is it something sudden? Like you said yesterday, the Shoshelet, when Lot was delayed leaving the town of Sodom, and we're astonished why doesn't want to get out of there to save his life. So the Torah uses cantillation signs to express things dramatically, questions, stop signs, continuation signs. Okay? Halohema ta'amim. They have a deep understanding. We often can understand psukim based upon cantillations. Where do we put a pause? Where do we put a comma? Where is there an ending? Haloim ta'amim, these are the ta'amim. Bahem anu korim b'mikra, that we read in the mikra. Okay? Ta'am. Interesting that the name of the cantillation size is called taste. Why do you think it's called ta'amim? Ta'am. It's giving...
Depending how we pronounce it, it has a different sound to it and a different message.
So why don't you use the word taste? Nehemiah, chapter 8, verse 8, explains clearly there that the objective of the tamekra is to give tam, taste, etc. This is salty. This is with a lot of pepper. There's emphasized. This is emphasized. This is not emphasized. This is question. This is just this. Okay. In other words, Ezra enacted to read before on Shabbos, Yom Sheni v'Chamishi, to read before the entire tzibur with Ta'amei Mikra. So even though we're doing a short reading, we can get a basic understanding according to the Ta'amim. Some of you know, like in the book of Bereshit, when it says V'Rachel Ba'a, there's another term, a chapter later or before, I don't remember, and there it says the same word, but it's not pronounced V'Rachel Ba'a, rather it's pronounced V'Rachel Ba'a. One means V'Rachel Ba'a and Rachel came. The other means Ba'a, Rachel is coming. It's a big difference in meaning between the present and past tense, isn't it? What determines that? The position of the tam of the mikra. The first one, it says Rachel Ba'a, the cantillation sign is on top of the letter Bet. Rachel Ba'a. The other one that states Rachel Ba'a, the cantillation sign is atop the Aleph. Look at this, the godly language of Hebrew. The same word, the same three letters, yet they're pronounced differently. And how do we know they're pronounced differently? Because of the accentuation. That's giving the taste, the ta'am, to the mikra. Okay? So, if you were to sing English Shakespearean poetry, which is probably very boring, it would probably be in monotone language, pronounced by the reader in the Cambridge Library. Okay? It could be. But here, reading Torah with the Ta'amei Mikra, wow. Kadma v'yazla revi'i. Wow, it has meaning, depth. Okay? We sing the Ta'amim in different ways, and it's bringing us a message. So, let's continue. The position of the tam is the place where you, the speaker, had intended to stop. Bein inyan li inyan, between one matter to another matter. If you get a tam of the mikra that serves the next word or the next phrase, well, it's telling you to continue reading. Don't stop. Don't stop. It's not a stop sign. So we see that there are two types of tamim. There's one type called tam misharet, it serves the next words, and there's another called tam mafsik, the tamim that interrupt or stop. There are major stoppages, there are minor stoppages. V'chein mavdilimhem. These tamei mikra also separate bein she'ela le'tshuva. We'll better understand a question or an answer. Uvein nosei le'nasu, or a subject or a topic. Ben adrim she'amram ha'medaber b'mihirut. We can even understand that there are statements that are said quickly. It could be that these are continuous ta'amim, that you don't pause anywhere. Ladrim shamaram b'maton, or things that are said with stoppages, one stoppage after the other. We'll see even a vertical line sometimes in between words. We have it in our Parshat Shavua. Quote, Ki yipalei mimcha davar, bein dam ledam. There's a vertical line called a pasik, a hefsek or mafsek, that separates. So all of these signs give us better meaning when we even read the Chumash, as if God is delivering the Chumash to us. Al kol eile efshar lichtov chiburim shleimim. All of this, you can write a lot of essays about the understanding, the science of the tamim, their meanings. Adam shoef el kol eile, someone that does aspire for all this, ein safek badavar. If you decide to learn Torah, to read Chumash, Navi, Ktuvim, and you read it according to the cantillation signs, you're going to understand the depth, the essence, the meaning of the words, which you will not find in poetry, in other languages, where the message is not deep. Or it is rhyming, it's nice to hear to the ear, but you can't compare poetic, rhythmic phrases to the Torah, which is sung in certain ways, and the meaning is behind the words. Ki ashira shakul, the poetic songs, eino nikra kim bederach achat. You can only read one way a poetic song. V'nimtza kor'o mechaber dvarim al pi rov b'makom sheish lafrid b'neihem u'mafsik b'makom sheish lamshich v'lo yitachen lizer mizakim b'mamatz rav. Okay? You could be making obvious mistakes when you're reading poetry based upon rhythm, that you might stop in a place that you should continue, or you might continue in a place you should be stopping. And it's very hard when you're reading regular poetry to know exactly where to stop or where to continue this matter. We'll continue with this point tomorrow. Be'ezrat Hashem. Shalom.